What's up, everyone? Brought to you again, unofficially, by Bodyglide. If anyone out there at Bodyglide is listening, sponsor me, please. So I have spent a lot of time in the garage lately, on the rower. Definitely need a little bit of a mental break. So today, I'm gonna head out for a run. Thankfully, it just stopped raining a couple hours ago. And it looks like it should be clear for the next couple hours, so let's get out there, get some fresh air. So, having done a pretty tough row yesterday, hour of power at, I would say, 9.5 out of 10 in terms of intensity and effort, really want to take it easy today. Today is barely a jog. So, I had my first PT appointment this morning. Long awaited. So yeah, going to get my hip checked out because it's been thankfully not really causing me pain when I exercise, but it's almost more of a just day to day as I'm squatting down to pick up stuff or even bending over to tie my shoes. It's more uncomfortable than it should be, so I definitely want to get it checked out before it turns into something bigger. And so very no nonsense, just straight to business, which I can appreciate nowadays. Really seemed to know her stuff. She was moving my legs around in all sorts of directions, twisting them as well, some mobility, range of motion assessments, some strength assessments. And what we learned is that my left glute and my left hip abductors, the muscles that are responsible for lifting your leg away from you to the side. So the hip adductors and my left glutes are both very weak. In fact, as she was doing a couple of the assessments, she literally said, "Wow, that's very weak." More interesting than that, though, was her recommendation that I go see an orthopedist and in all likelihood get some scans done. Could be an MRI, not sure exactly, but because she felt pretty strongly that my issue is not purely a muscular one. There may be something articular in nature having to do with the cartilage, I guess the hip labrum specifically, which is obviously a little bit more concerning because that's much, much harder to treat. But we'll cross that bridge if and when we get there. So got home from the appointment and immediately reached out to my family doc to get the referral to see the orthopedist. So hopefully I don't have to wait too long for that. Anyways, I know you all don't really want to hear about my ass muscles and how strong or weak they are. What I really wanted to talk to you all about today was my mental health journey. Let me be clear, I'm still very much on that journey. I suppose I'll be on that journey for the rest of my life. Just share with you a little bit of the ups and downs that I've been through over the last few years, and more importantly, some of the strategies and tactics that I have found helpful. I think for me, my struggles really began in 2019, summer of 2019. Now, I'll try to not go into too much detail on this setup here, but my mom was very ill, terminally ill, with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She'd been battling it going on 9 or 10 years by that point. Lived on her own in a small apartment, thankfully just down the street from where Ian and I were living at the time. It was Actually, I remember this clearly. It was during Emery's second birthday party. We were in our old townhouse, so we had friends and family over. We were all hanging out, and I got a call from one of my mom's friends that my mom had fallen in her apartment, and her friend wasn't able to get in. She could hear my mom asking for help. So I hustled over there and went in, and sure enough, my mom had been on the floor, on her back, in her bathroom for, by that time, probably well over 12 hours. I mean, it's a pretty shocking situation to walk into, and that really began a series of events which honestly are kind of a blur because of how stressful they were. But long story short, took my mom to the ER that night and reached a decision very shortly thereafter that my mom couldn't live on her own anymore. So I definitely felt a lot of guilt over that. My mom was in the hospital, and I had to, in I think it was 48 hours or so, I had to find a skilled nursing facility, otherwise known as SNF in the medical world. I had to find a SNF to send my mom to for rehab and PT. So did that. And then SNF is not a permanent residence, so I knew it would likely be a matter of weeks before I'd have to figure out my mom's permanent housing situation. So right after my mom got into the SNF, I embarked on a search for an assisted living facility. There was no way she could have lived with us because we were in a 3-story townhouse, just physically unmanageable for her. So was able to thankfully find a good assisted living facility for her, also near us. But in that 2 to 3 week stretch between my mom's fall and finding her new permanent home, I just remember being so stressed out that, because I would spend my days touring assisted living homes, talking to healthcare professionals about elder care, Medicare, things that I knew nothing about. And it was just an overwhelming amount of information and an overwhelming decision to have to make. As an only child, I felt immense pressure to do what was in my mom's best interests. I remember coming home at the end of each day, and Ian would be talking to me, and I literally wouldn't even hear her. I think my brain was just spinning. And so I think that event, summer of 2019, was really what kicked off my mental health decline, because the transition from into assisted living was tough, obviously, for my mom. It's very stressful. And then, of course, March 2020, what happens? Pandemic. So we're all stuck at home, unable to go anywhere. Ian and I have, at that point, an almost 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old running all over the house. So, if that wasn't tough enough, keeping the kids occupied, because again, those first couple months their daycare was closed. If that wasn't tough enough, the assisted living home wasn't allowing visitors. So, effective mid to late March, I literally could not go in and see my mom, give her a hug, and really even talk to her, all the way up until that August. So it was about 5 full months that I had no physical interaction with my mom when she probably needed me the most. At most, I could talk to her on the phone, but her cognition was already declining so rapidly that it was really hard to have a phone conversation with her. By the way, this is not at all, I don't want anyone feeling bad for me. Taking care of our parents as they get older and as they enter their final years is something we will all go through at some point. It's part of the human experience. That was really tough. From 2019 through to 2020, my mental health just continued to gradually decline, and got to the point that in 2021, I was really struggling to show up the way I wanted to, especially at home. I could fake it through the day at work, but when I was off the clock and at home with Ian and the kids, I really struggled. I was impatient with the kids. I was impatient with Ian. As I talked about in my last Real Talk run, I have struggled over much of my kids' lives to be patient with them and just empathetic and kind to them. And that was especially true in 2021, to the point where it really drove a wedge in between Ian and I. So my relationship with my kids was not in a good spot. My relationship with Ian, not in a great spot. So at some point in 2021, Ian and I began couples therapy, and I'll be honest and say I was not exactly chomping at the bit, but I knew we were in a bad place. I was in a bad place personally, where I think on all three fronts, as an individual, as a partner, and as a parent, we're struggling. So jumped into it, and very fortunately, Ian and I found a wonderful couples therapist. It's amazing. We still actually see her sometimes nowadays if we're trying to work through different things in our marriage. And what I learned through couples therapy was that and actually it was pretty quickly on in our sessions, that our therapist diagnosed me with dysthymia, which is, I think, otherwise called, I forget what. It's a milder form of chronic depression. Now, mild, it's an interesting use of the term mild, because mild in this case doesn't necessarily mean like, oh, I'm just a little sad, but otherwise things are great. Dysthymia can have a pretty profound effect on one's life, and what makes it so dangerous in a way is that it's an insidious disease, right? It's not like you wake up one morning and, oh my God, all of a sudden I'm depressed. It doesn't work like that. It's a very slow, gradual decline, one that's imperceptible day to day. But over the period of a year or more, as in my case, the difference is significant. Depression can be inherited. Some of us are genetically predisposed to depression. My dad suffered from depression from the time he was a teenager up until he passed in his 60s, as far as I know. And I don't know if he ever got treatment for it. He was a very sweet man, by all accounts, very kind soul, but nonetheless battled depression and alcoholism, which fueled his downward spiral through most of his adult life. And so I've always known since I was a teenager that my dad struggled with this, and that there was a chance I might too. And actually, as I think more about it and as I've reflected on it with my therapist, my mom likely suffered from a form of depression too, undiagnosed and untreated. So maybe I was set up for it from the day I was born, but summer of 2021, we were in couples therapy, and that kind of went on until, over a year. I kind of limped along through 2022 and, was still struggling on all fronts, feeling lost at work, honestly lost at home too, and just stuck. And I would often scapegoat work, and I would tell Ian things like, oh, if I just get a new job or XYZ changes at work, I'm pretty sure I'll feel better. But in hindsight, my dissatisfaction with work was just a symptom, not the cause. And so I was on the struggle bus big time through 2022. And the way I medicated myself was, oddly enough, through the game of golf. And now I've known, again, since I was a teenager, that I have an addictive personality. Like I mentioned, my dad was an alcoholic. He was also a gambler. And it's a good chance that that's in my DNA somewhere as well. Now, there are far more destructive habits I could have adopted, so in the grand scheme of things, it could have been a lot worse, but I escaped through the game of golf. Now, I'd be at the driving range 3-4 times a week, playing a couple rounds a week. As any golfers out there will know, that takes a lot of time. Golf is not something you can just do in your garage for an hour, like the rower. It's a big time commitment. And I spent better part of 2 years obsessing over golf, my golf game, how good could I get? And while objectively I did get decently good at golf, when I look back on it, it didn't make me happier. There would be very brief moments of instant gratification if I, had a great round or went on a nice golf trip somewhere, but those highs were always very short-lived. And I felt like I was constantly seeking the next one through the game of golf. But, I suppose as with any addiction, those highs get harder and harder to find. So I really wasn't any happier. I was spending too much time on the golf course, at the driving range, away from home. I mean, literally escaping for hours at a time. It was just bad. At the end of 2022, so by now, it's been, 3 years of stumbling through the fog of dysthymia, not making a whole lot of progress, having had some really tough conversations with Ian about what I was going to do, if anything, to get better. In hindsight, I can appreciate how patient Ian was with me. And I don't think she'll mind me saying, but, as a mom of 2 young kids, she had also gone through her own mental health challenges. But unlike me, she'd been very proactive about seeking out help. I know for her, it was very frustrating to see me clearly struggling, and from her perspective, not taking any action or serious action beyond going to couples therapy. So I talked to my family doc towards the end of 2022, decided that I would try a low dose of Wellbutrin, which is a commonly prescribed antidepressant. So I was diagnosed. He confirmed the diagnosis, dysthymia, and put me on a low dose. I think it was 150 milligrams a day of Wellbutrin, and just to see how I would respond. I remember my doctor telling me when he prescribed the Wellbutrin the first time that it really stuck with me. He said, look, Wellbutrin is not going to make you happier, right? It's not going to make the depression go away. What it will do, if it's working, is give you just that little bit of extra energy, extra patience to take the additional steps you need to make yourself better. In other words, it will give you the capacity to do the work you need to do to restore your mental health. Wellbutrin on its own will not fix it. So I really took that to heart. And 2023, now being on Wellbutrin for a few months, was a much better year on all fronts. Just like how you don't wake up one morning suddenly depressed. You don't wake up one morning magically feeling better either. It's a gradual climb out of that hole. But over the course of 2023, I just noticed that I had a little bit more patience with my kids. When Ian and I would have disagreements, I was just that little bit more patient and understanding with Ian, and wouldn't get as defensive or angry as quickly. It was just like my doctor said. It gave me just that little bit of extra energy, extra patience to navigate tough conversations and challenging moments. And now it's almost been 4 years since the start of the pandemic. And don't get me wrong, there are still challenges. Ian and I still have little dust-ups here and there, but I think the extra patience and energy, as well as a couple of years of therapy that we did, gave us a lot more tools to help us navigate the difficult times. I will say, I weaned off of the Wellbutrin about 6 months after starting it. So I'm currently no longer on it, but I guess in a way, working out. Exercise is now my drug of choice. So, as with anything else, it can be too much of a good thing. So I'm trying to really be mindful of how much energy I'm giving to my fitness journey versus how much I'm giving to my family and friends and work. Although maybe I'll save work for a separate conversation, but so I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job of maintaining that balance now. If I could go back in time and do anything differently, I think it would be making that doctor's appointment much earlier. And I know it's probably comes off as very cliche advice, but I don't know what it is. Whether it's just the way we're wired as men, whether it's my own individual hard-headedness, I don't really know, but I just, for whatever reason, didn't want to make that appointment. Maybe because I knew I'd have to face the truth, and that's what kept me away. But I would make that appointment earlier with my family doc and just try the medication. Especially since the pandemic, so many of us have endured mental health challenges, and also thankfully, in a way, because of the pandemic, talking about mental health is much more acceptable now than it was even 4 or 5 years ago. So there's much less of a stigma attached to mental health or mental health issues. So overall, that's a very positive step forward for people in general. But I would just say, don't need to suffer in silence and suffer alone. I think it goes back to my childhood, being an only child and being bullied, being a bit of a social outcast. I have always believed that I would have to do things myself. I couldn't trust those around me to help me or do them for me. So I had to become very independent at a very young age. And while that has served me well in many parts of my life, when it came to my mental health struggles, it absolutely did not. And I spent 2 more years than I should have in just a really miserable place. So, really don't want to go back there. In some later news, we are 10 days away from 2K race. It's finally here. Countdown begins. And I'm excited. You know, it's been 21 years since I did an indoor rowing race. Last time would have been senior year of high school. I'm sure the adrenaline will be pumping, and we'll also have a very special guest showing up to my race. I won't spoil it now, but I'll definitely be filming what I can on race day. So you guys will get to see, but it should really be a lot of fun. And while I am confident in my training and my race plan for the day, if somehow things don't go as well as I would have hoped, that is a-okay too, because this has really been as much about the journey to get there as it will be about the destination. In fact, the journey is way more important. So regardless of what happens on race day, you know, I'm gonna be appreciative of what I've done the last few months and keep marching forward. The sweat was really stinging my eyes today. Not sure why, but yeah, 10 days left until race day. I haven't quite figured out what I'm gonna do to taper for the race, but I'll just see how my body feels next week, early next week, and go from there. We'll definitely take a full day off on Thursday next week 2 days before the race. And then Friday will be very light, just maybe getting a couple short intervals in just to make sure I'm still feeling sharp. But first half of the week, I'm not exactly sure what I'm gonna do. So we'll see. Deal with that next week. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep chasing. Peace.